Welcome to Organized Crime and Punishment, the best spot in town to hang out and talk about history and crime, with your hosts, Steve and Mustache Chris.
Welcome to this very first episode of Organized Crime and Punishment, a history and crime podcast. My name is Steve, and I am joined by my co-host, Mustache Chris. In this podcast, we are going to give you the basic concept of organized crime and punishment, a history podcast, and really break down what we're going to try and do in this show. Now, Chris, maybe tell us a little bit how we met and where the genesis of this podcast came from.
Oh, yeah. Me and you've been talking for, I don't know, how many years now?
4 or 5 years at least.
Yeah, I don't know. We met like just via Facebook, really, right? On history podcasts, arguing with people about events in history, really. And then me and you kind of just tended to agree on a lot of stuff. We're still arguing about history to this day.
Now, this podcast, and it's maybe we're the right rebels to make this kind of podcast, a history podcast on true crime. Now, Chris became a regular guest on my previous podcast, Beyond the Big Screen, and we really started talking about very different kind of movie in Beyond the Big Screen, but it developed over time into talking about true crime and especially organized crime.
Yeah, initially I think for first movie we were discussing, like when we're talking about like me, coming on your podcast once in a while, was the Prometheus, and that turned into like almost like it felt like a month discussion about the movie. And then, we've done like made a lot of content together actually on Beyond the Big Screen. We also did a series on 8 Man Out, which was really cool. It ties into, because it's kind of about organized crime. Maybe we can revisit that for this podcast that we're doing now. And then we kind of shifted. We were going to do like a little series on the mafia, and I think we picked out I think it was like 6 movies we were going to do initially, and then it just kind of one thing led to another, and we kept on adding movies. We kept on saying, oh, we got to do like a background episode on this, and like more and more of the research was more about like the history behind these movies. And we decided, let's just do a organized crime podcast.
When we started diving into the talking about these mafia movies, and we talk about this movie and that movie, we both started to feel kind of constrained that we had to tie it to a movie, because there's so many great stories that go beyond any movie. And it's like, oh, I wish we could talk about this topic or that topic, the Appalachian Conference, or the story of the Colombo family. But we really couldn't, because there wasn't a movie that directly tied to it. And that's where we started to think that let's stretch this out. And that's what this podcast is really going to be about, is deep dives into so many aspects of organized crime, and things that you can look forward to in this very first series we're going to look into the 5 families of New York. We're going to look into really individualized stories of the 5 families of New York, focusing really in this first series about the golden age of the mafia, of how we define it, of the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and then into the 90s. But from there, we have a lot of different plans to get into specific moments of the mafia, and we're looking beyond the mafia as well. We're looking at organized crime all over the world. And that's really what we want to try and do, is bring a historical light to the true crime genre.
Yeah, for sure. Because like we're both kind of history nerds, right? Like we mentioned earlier, that's how we met, was just like arguing about history on history podcast pages, right? And me and you were always discussing history. And when we were initially kind of coming up with the idea, like I went looking, and I mean, there's a lot of podcasts with mafia content. I wouldn't say a lot, but there's some. But a lot of them are more, they don't really bring like kind of like a historical perspective to it, that I find that we're going to try to do with this podcast, where we're going to take the material seriously. We're going to try to do like really big deep dives into these into these subjects. So, just a little teaser. We're going to be talking about Murder Inc. And I've been writing the notes and doing the research, and it just keeps on getting deeper and deeper and deeper.
That's really what's unique about what we're going to do is we're following all the trails. You can put up one of those cork boards with the pictures and the strings connecting all the people. That's what we're really going to try to do. Chris nor I are historians. We're not academics. We're just really highly interested people and hobbyists who want to go deep into this topic of true crime and the mafia and take it really where it goes and where it takes us. We're going to try and make connections throughout all of these series between many of the different stories, because we're really looking at many parallel stories that really aren't even completely told right now. The academics are still trying to figure out these stories. So we're going to try and present it to you as best as we possibly can from the perspective of not academic historians, but people who are really interested, because honestly, that's how the detectives are looking at it. That's how journalists are looking at it. We're trying to look at it from a lot of different perspectives.
Oh yeah, for sure. And just to be honest too, there's really not there's some serious academic work being done about the mafia history in general, but it's one of those things that it's still relatively new, right? So a lot of the research or what have you is from journalists. It's still a relatively new field, mafia research, in terms of serious academic work where, people with master's degrees and PhDs are studying the subject as for their thesis and theses and stuff like that. Right. But we're going to try our best to be as accurate as we possibly can. I think we both came to the agreement too that, in terms of kind of our own personal opinions, we're going to be a little bit more open about them in terms of, what we think happened or what could have happened or maybe what should have been done. So that'll be interesting.
We're not going to leave you without content on this first episode. In this first episode, you're going to get made into the Organized Crime and Punishment podcast. Now, getting made or becoming a made man is the process by which a qualified, bona fide person is initiated into the mafia. And the process in the U.S. evolved from a long-standing secret society initiation rules in the Sicilian and the Southern Italian mafia and organized crime. The mafia initiation process is what you would call in a phased-in ritual process, and there's many examples of phased-in initiation processes in religion and other secret societies, and we can go all the way back to the Roman times with mystery cults and that sort of thing, and even in a way, Christianity initially, the way it initially handled initiation into the religion was a phased-in. And we can definitely see analogies between 19th century secret societies of Europe and mafia initiation.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a lot of similarities you can make a lot of comparisons to say, Freemasons and, we don't know much about the Rosicrucians, but what we do know about it in terms of the secrecy and how you were initiated. It's really why the mafia was able to work so well for as long as it did was because it was a secret society that law enforcement or just people in general couldn't easily enter.
Now, it's pretty interesting because we know a lot about the initiation process of the mafia in the United States. Really, for the most part, a prospective member had to become a known associate of an already made member. There's a famous person who he didn't become a rat per se, but he exited the life, and he was a really high-ranking member of the Colombo family. And he said, you don't fill out an application for the mafia. You have to know somebody who's going to vouch for you. And then you had to become an earner, so to speak, or someone who could prove that they could make money for the organization. Then after that, the books had to be open, which means that the entire mafia organization, which is called the Commission, which we will talk about extensively in this series, was needed to be ready to take on new members, and that certain prospective members met certain qualifications, such as they had to be 100% Italian, or even in some cases 100% Sicilian. Then there's the actual ritual of initiation, and maybe Chris, you can describe the initiation process.
Yeah, most famously, Joe Valachi kind of described it. So the first time we really got a kind of a clear idea of the initiation process. And according to him, you would have your finger pricked with a needle, and I've heard different, like the way he described it, and I've heard like different things, but apparently this blood would fall onto like a picture of a saint, and then they would burn the saint, right? When you get initiated in, you basically have to say that like this is your family now. It becomes first before you even your own family. And, you know, breaking omerta, you're basically saying you're signing away, you know, is a death sentence.
And then that card of the saint where the blood is dripped onto, that's burned in the person's hand. Usually the most important members of the family would be at that introduction. And then there's a formal introduction of the gathered members of that this person is now made as a member. That we've heard that we get this story from several different mob informants or former made members of the mafia. So with some differences, but you can kind of probably see that the process evolved throughout time. It evolved from the Sicilians, and the Southern Italian organizations took on a certain flair in the United States. And then throughout the decades that slightly changed, and probably different ceremonies went in different directions. As Chris alluded to, the first made member to discuss this ceremony in detail was also one of the very first high-profile mafia members to testify for the government, or basically what we might call rat out his family members on the inner workings. And this was a Genovese family soldier named Joe Valachi way back in the 1960s. So right now we're going to listen to a clip of a congressional testimony by Joe Valachi. And in this clip, in front of the United States Senate Select Committee on Improper Activities in Labor and Management, also called the McClellan Committee, Joe Valachi describes the initiation ritual in quite detail. Let's listen to Joe Valachi, in his own words, explain the ceremony himself.
The table was a long table, and there was a gun and a knife on the table. And
how many were at the table?
About 35 to 40. And sat me down and made me repeat in Italian.
Did they set you down at the table or in a chair out front?
Sat me down on the end of the table with Maranzano doing the talking, next to Maranzano.
All right. Now, you sat next to him. Then what happened?
Well, he had the knife and the gun on the table. I repeated some words he told me, but I only could explain what he meant. I could repeat the words, but they were in Sicilian.
They were what?
In Sicilian.
In Sicilian. You repeated, but you didn't understand what they meant.
Right. Then they explained.
They explained what they meant. Who explained? Maranzano?
Well, he could talk pretty good English, Maranzano. He talked 12 languages. He went on to explain that you lived by the gun and by the knife, and you died by the gun and by the knife.
What kind of a ceremony did you go through?
Well, then...
And taking that oath?
Well, then, he gave me a piece of paper. I was supposed to, and burn it. And
well, now, without burning the paper, just take a piece of paper there and show us how you did it. You don't even set the paper fire, but give him a piece of paper. Let's demonstrate just what you did.
In other words, now this piece of paper This piece of paper is burned.
Paper's burning.
You light it.
Yeah?
And then in your hand you say, well, again they give you words in Italian, but I know what it meant.
In other words, while you were repeating the words, you were burning the paper.
Right. This is the way I burn if I expose this organization.
And that was symbolic of the fate that was to befall you if you betrayed the organization.
Right. Until the piece of paper burned.
You'd be burned to ashes.
Right.
All right. Now, what else did you do in that ceremony?
Then after that, they got around the table and they threw numbers.
They drew what?
Numbers. Between 1 to 5, for instance.
How you mean?
Well, here, like this, throw 3 or 1 or 5. Let's say the way you got a table there right now, everybody throws a number.
In other words, we'd start down there at the table, and somebody'd hold up a number, each one would hold up some fingers.
Yeah, we count the...
They could hold up as many as they wanted to.
Up to 5.
Up to 5. Well,
right.
That's about all they hold on.
Well, let's say we start from you, Senator.
Yeah, we start with me.
And let's say it's 35, 40.
I put up 2.
Right.
And he'd put up some.
Yeah, you add it all up. Let's say
we add it all up.
Let's say we get a figure about 38.
About 38, all right.
We start from you. And let's say you go all around and it comes to the senator next to you.
Yeah, he's next to me.
He is my, what you call, godfather. Then he picks your finger.
Who?
The godfather.
He picks your finger?
He picks your finger with a needle. Makes a little blood come out. In other words, that's to express the blood relation. Supposed to be like brothers.
That's the letting of blood.
That's right.
In other words, symbolic of the fact you're willing to spill your blood.
Right.
To give your blood, to give your life.
Yeah. As to what I'm telling you now, I need to go no further to say nothing else. This is what I'm telling you, what I'm exposing to you and the press and everybody. This is my doom. This is the promise I'm breaking that even if I talk, I should never talk about this, and I'm doing so. That's my best way to explain.
That is the highest oath you took.
Right.
In other words, that was the most sacred in this organization.
Right. I want
that you would never tell this.
Right. Right.
So based on that clip, Chris, what do you think about getting made? And what do you think about Joe Valachi's description of this process?
Sounds intense, like it's no small endeavor. Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds cliche, but it really isn't cliche. Like when you sign up to the mafia, you're signing up for life. There's no leaving the life. There's only 2 ways you're really leaving the life. It's you become a rat. Well, I mean, I guess there's 3, right? You become a rat and you rat on all your friends, people that you grew up with. Their family, their kids. You wind up in a coffin or you wind up in jail. It's no small, it's very serious. It's a very serious endeavor when you join the mafia.
And I think that Joe Valachi really shows the way he wasn't born into the mafia. His father wasn't in the mafia. His uncles weren't in the mafia. He was in the double A's, if we're going to use a baseball metaphor of crime. He was noticed by the mafia, and then he met the qualifications. He proved that he was an earner, and then he got brought in as a made man. He really exemplifies that process of how someone can move up into the mafia as a way to advance their criminal career.
Yeah, because they and it's not necessarily, you don't even necessarily have to be like a very remarkable individual. Joe Valachi wasn't, super intelligent. He was kind of a dullard, really, to be honest with you. Like, he didn't even know like basic geography of the United States, stuff like that. Like, there's like, they'd be asking him a question about like, oh, do you know about what was going on in this state? And he'd be turning to his lawyer, and people thought he was like, oh, should I be talking? He's like, no, he's literally asking like, where is this? I don't know where this is. Like you pointed out, he could earn, for a long time. He was loyal. He was in the mafia for a very long time before he turned rat. And there's a whole story for, why he ended up becoming rat, or whatever word you want to use. Yeah, he was in in the family, and he never worked for himself up very high, but he was a soldier, and people knew who Joe Valachi was.
This episode is meant to just wet your beak a little on what Mustache Chris and I are going to do in this new podcast, Organized Crime and Punishment, a history and crime podcast. 5 episodes on the background of the big 5 New York families are available right now to download and listen to. You can listen on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, and everywhere else you find podcasts. Leave a rating and review on your podcatcher of choice. That really helps us know what you're thinking. If you want to join the conversation, follow us on social media by searching for A2Z History Page, or you can email us at crime@a2zhistorypage.com. More importantly, if you like what you hear, tell your friends about Organized Crime and Punishment so that your friends can become friends of ours.
Thanks for becoming friends of ours, guys. Forget about it.
The music for Organized Crime and Punishment is provided by my friend Rick, and the song is called 5/8 Socket by Rico's Groove. That's Rico's Groove, Gruv. To find more great music like this, go right now and subscribe to Rico's Groove on YouTube and Spotify. You could search for Rico's Groove on those platforms or find links in the show notes.
You've been listening to Organized Crime and Punishment, a history and crime podcast. To learn more about what you heard today, find links to social media, and how to support the show, go to our website, A2ZHistoryPage.com. Become a friend of ours by sending us an email to crime@A2ZHistoryPage.com. All of this and more can be found in the show notes. We'll see you next time on Organized Crime and Punishment. Forget about it.